Okay, I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is the April meeting of the Monterey Peninsula Water Management District's Board. I'd like to open with a roll call.
Director Hoffman.
Present.
Director Adams.
Here.
Director Edwards.
Here.
Director Evans.
Here.
Director Burns.
Here.
Director Riley.
Here.
And Director Potter.
Here.
All present.
Great. Okay, and if you'll stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right, are there any additions or corrections to the agenda?
Yes, Madam Chair, a couple. On page 59, item 6 on the consent calendar, in the recommendation in the very first line, there's the word either. It has no purpose and wasn't intended to be there, so strike the word either. Then I would request that we invert 14 and 15 because the presentation involves a number of folks who've traveled here to present, and that'll give them a chance to be basically first and get out of here. And then when you get to consent, I just want to call everyone's attention to item 8, which is adoption of the legislative advocacy plan. Makes for good reading for those people who wonder what we do outside of here locally. And then you may have questions on either number 3 or number 7. And the reason I raise those is we were unable to hold administrative committee to hear all of them because of a lack of quorum.
Got it. All right, thank you. We'll accept the, do I need a motion to accept the changes? All right, so I'll.
Or the change the agenda? Yeah.
To change the agenda, okay. There's a motion, Director Byrne, and a second, Director Potter. All the, any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. We'll proceed on the amended agenda. All right, so at this point we'll open it up for oral communications. Anyone wishing to address the board on anything not on the agenda tonight, you're welcome to do so at this time for 3 minutes.
Dan Turner, Monterey. I think that it is wonderful that the Water Management District and Monterey One Water are moving forward with the EIR for Phase 2 of the Pure Water Project. It's not just that I hope, for a variety of good reasons, that Cal-Am never builds its $330 million desal plant, which will double our water bills, unless, of course, they end up spending $500 million on it, in which case it would probably triple our water bills. But that's not what I want to talk about tonight. Tonight I'd like to suggest that it is time for the Water Management District to go out into the surrounding communities on the peninsula, the Salinas side of Monterey County, and up into Santa Cruz and San Benito counties to see if there is any interest in a regional desal facility. I'd be surprised if there isn't. Remember, if Cal-Am hadn't torpedoed the regional desal project that was in with Marina Coast Water District and Monterey County back in 2012 on the pretext, which was complete baloney, that Steve Collins, a minor figure in the project's conflict of interest, had poisoned the entire project, we'd have a functioning desal plant by now, and we would be living happily ever after, water-wise. The reason that Cal-Am wanted out of that project was because its only interest in it was some pipeline. By destroying that project, it was able, in collusion with the county soups, to get its own desal project, which will earn it billions, that's with a B, over the years, if it can actually get it built and we don't get rid of them. But that's water under the bridge, or over the dam. And now I think it's time to see if a sensibly sized desal facility can be built that will fulfill the water needs of all the communities that are interested in participating in such a project. There is no doubt that a public desal facility built without Cal-Am's greedy participation would produce water that would be much less expensive than Cal-Am's hyper-profit-making catastrophe.
Thank you, Mr. Turner.
Good evening, Tom Raleigh, representing Monterey Peninsula Taxpayers Association. Sometimes it's hard to know where to begin after to follow somebody like Dan Turner. The main reason I thought I would speak briefly at public comments today is that there was a document submitted to your board in March from the head of Public Water Now concerning about what the water needs of the peninsula are. And there's so many misstatements, it would take me probably an hour to debunk the bad data that's in there. I can tell you we're in a water shortage. We might as well be a water desert. We're in forest conservation for I don't know how many years now. You've been managing it, I think, ever since you got here day one. Mr. Stolt arrived. It's gotten so bad, and I mentioned this before. My wife enters flowers in the county fair every year. Last year there were 2 tables and a couple hanging begonias. This year they've canceled the floral arrangements and floral completely. It used to be a whole building. This is this is a situation we put on ourselves by not adequately planning and having a water project online. To say that we have enough water right now when we're using 9,000 to 10,000 acre feet a year ballpark, we need more water. Small businesses definitely need more water. I can tell you, having done commercial real estate, one of the reasons I got out of it was small businesses that wanted to start up or wanted to expand. There was no water available. And it's crippled the growth of jobs in small businesses on the peninsula for years. Virtually all the communities that are short of water for commercial use, let alone for remodels and lots of record, and perhaps building on vacant lots where, whatever the housing that could be built or whether it's commercial. So we have a shortage of water now. It's significant, and trying to poo-poo that we don't, it's just bald-faced lies. And, how can you debunk it? I wish sometimes some of you directors would make a point of saying, we've received this and looked at it, and it's nonsense. And it's really frustrating to read this in the report each month, a document that was submitted in the March meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Raleigh. Any further public comment? Okay, seeing none, I'll close public comment, move on to the consent calendar. Would any of the directors like to pull any items from the agenda for further discussion?
6 and 7.
Okay, we'll pull items 6 and 7. Anybody else?
4 and 5.
4 and 5.
That's consistent with my thinking. Okay.
Any others? Any members of the public wishing to pull an item for discussion? No. All right. And I have a question on item 11. So I'd like to pull 4, 5, 6, 7, and 11.
Move approval of the remaining consent agenda.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion to approve Director Byrne and a second Director Riley. Further discussion? I don't know why. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, item number 4.
Yes, thank you. So this is a request for an additional almost $13,000 of funds towards the district's share of the North Monterey County Drought Contingency Plan, or DCP. This is a project that's gone approximately 2.5 years beyond its original timeline, due in no small part that, as originally proposed, it was coupled with the other grant-funded Bureau of Reclamation project for the Salinas and Carmel River Basin studies. Once it was crystal clear that those two weren't going to be in concert with each other, we went ahead and split them off and finished this one. The board authorized $225,000 for our match, a $200,000 Bureau grant, and we did not include any contingency at that time because we had a fairly detailed report of the work, and it just went on so long with additional reviews and additional drafts, and the request that came in from the prime consultant is this $13,000 increase. I think it's reasonable. I think our mistake was not putting contingency in the original approval to begin with, but that's what it's about.
Okay, directors, do you have any questions for staff?
So Dave, the first thing that I noticed and it came to mind to me is that, and I know the board approved back in 2016 or 15 this, but why is it that we are doing drought planning for an area that's outside of our jurisdictional boundary?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. It's partially in, partially out, and it was inclusive basically all the way to Salinas. It was driven by Pure Water Monterey, the original Phase 1, the $113 million project, and an understanding that federal dollars were likely going to require a drought contingency plan before they would consider grant money for construction. Hence the reason we tried to get this done 2.5 years ago. As it turns out, we did get federal dollars without a completed drought contingency plan, and that was based on a separate document whose name now escapes me, but think of it like a feasibility study. They give it a different name. And so all of the qualified projects that could receive the WIN Act monies all had to have an approved feasibility study in place. Didn't come with a requirement for a drought contingency plan. We still think for federal dollars down the line that will be a requirement. You may have heard a lot of discussion going on with the Colorado River Compact recently, that Arizona wasn't signed on to their drought contingency plan, and it was all going to fall apart, and then California said, we'll wait for you for a little bit, and then Arizona came in. So the concept of a drought contingency plan is fundamental for Bureau of Reclamation project funding. It's just, so it was to position Pure Water Monterey. We in effect told them that once the phase that we're involved in is gone, it's basically up to you, Monterey One Water, and some of the other parties who want to see potential CSIP expansion, Casserole Seawater Intrusion Project expansion, and those kinds of things, to carry it to the next level. But we led because we were the water agency, they needed a water agency, and we were partners in the project.
So why wasn't the Monterey County Water Resources Agency the lead, since it's North County, and it seems like we're the deep pockets for when somebody needs this kind of work to be done. They come to us and we end up footing the bill.
Great question. I'll give you two answers, or two parts. Monterey One Water and we cooked this up, basically for, as I said, for our project. We included Monterey County Water Resources Agency, Cal Water Service, who does Salinas, ALCO, California American. There was a pretty big tent of parties at the front end. As it continued to go on for several years, it got smaller, but still interest. The Water Resources Agency was in there. They're not yet as adept as we have been in terms of state and federal lobbying. Apart from Luis Alejo's individual work to get $10 million for the Interlake Tunnel, they have not been very successful or very focused on this kind of stuff. So to the extent there's no benefit for the district going forward, it's going to have to be the other agencies. But I don't know if I'm not trying to shame the county representatives and former county representatives, but the Resources Agency has not been really good at finding money, I would say. But we want to help them, and we want to position them. So that's kind of where it would go.
But wasn't this all critical after the 2 years we spent getting the recycled water project on board? The County Water Resources Agency was a piece of the puzzle, but they weren't really in a position to make the project happen. So this project benefits the peninsula, not necessarily Salinas or...
Yeah, it was all geared to benefit Pure Water Monterey, and then future benefits with, a 5-year update and so forth. Once the basin studies are done, which is really, 90% Salinas, 10% Carmel, once that series of modeling effort, which is also climate change and the effect of future supply needs, is done, that'll help inform any updates to the drought contingency plan. Same thing with the Salinas Valley Groundwater Sustainability Agency. When that plan is written, And I can tell you what all three of these plans are doing is just bringing all of the regional players closer together. And they're basically gonna have to figure out which ones they have to lead on going forward. But if there's any benefit in us taking the lead, as it brought the others into the tent, but we fully recognize we weren't gonna be there for, their projects later. But when you look at the contingency projects that have been identified, so there's measures that are policy, and then there's measures that are projects. Long list of projects in our plan will benefit the sustainability agency's goals under the Salinas Valley's efforts. There are projects that benefit the peninsula. There are projects that benefit Marina Coast. So regionally, it's a regional document, but we led it for the reasons I've told you.
And so that's, my focus is when we spend money, how is it consistent with the district's mission? And when we start spending money, and again, it seems like we're the deep pockets of when nobody else will step up.
Is there a question? It's not discussion time yet.
Okay, then, there was a question. How is this consistent with the district's mission?
And great question. When we started, we thought it would be done in a timely manner that would enable us to get money for Pure Water Monterey. What really happened is it created kind of a regional approach to this stuff, and it gave us a platform to go talk to all of the Bureau folks, put us on the map with the Bureau. We did some visits, and ultimately we got the 4.1 million. It's just that 4.1 million didn't require the drought contingency plan, but it kind of put us in play for that purpose. So,
So if I could, Madam Chair, if I could just continue that line of questioning. So isn't the mission of the district basically to address the overpumping of the Carmel River in State Order 9510? And our mission is to find water, available water, wherever we can. And we know that the Salinas Valley actually has a large amount of excess water that either flows to the ocean or is being used and treated for agricultural materials. So that, to Gary's question, I think he was asking is, that's why it's consistent, I would ask.
yeah, and I would posit that you are correct.
Thank you.
Question? The schedule has slipped. What's the current schedule?
It's complete. We're filing our final, we're waiting for the final document back from the Bureau of Reviewers, but this will close out the budget. The agreement with the Bureau of Reclamation ended March 31st. We are trying to get our final payments out of the slightly broken federal payment system.
Okay.
But,
Eminent, then.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? I'd like to
Second.
open this up for public comment. Is anybody wishing to make a comment on this item? Okay, seeing none, I will close public comment and bring it back to the board for discussion or a motion.
I'd like one comment. I think, Gary, just a little different point of view. Instead of thinking that we're deep pockets, I like to think of it as we're in a leadership position. And I would like to see and actually commend the district for stepping up and taking over, in fact, being relied upon for leading some of these projects. So I see it as much more of a positive light. I would move approval.
All right, we have a motion from Director Riley and a second from
We haven't gone
Director-
around for comment.
Potter, and
Yes.
so I will ask if there is any further discussion.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have a motion and a second. And now we have discussion.
Okay, thank
So
you.
let's discuss.
I realize this is at the end of the process, and so this is just cleaning up at the end. And I don't disagree with George, what you're saying about us being in a leadership role, but at the same time, you can be in a leadership role without being the deep pockets at the same time. And so I'm just concerned that nobody else historically has stepped up, and we have. And I don't think that's a bad thing, but I think that that's because we have the funding available. But at some point, you just got to say, everybody else has to take their responsibilities.
Through the chair. It would benefit you had you been through the whole process, of course, and I think a number of us have been. And really, this whole project recycled water depended on the water coming from Salinas to make it work. So this whole process was benefiting the peninsula, and the offset was involving Salinas and providing for the seawater intrusion. It's a comprehensive solution, and we are so fortunate that Dave Stolt was able to orchestrate this. This is not deep pockets. This is satisfying our mission.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, then all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Move on to item number 5, consider approval for retaining consultant services to prepare a proposal to the Department of Water Resources for Prop 1 Integrated Regional Water Management Implementation Grant Funds.
Madam Chair, members of the board, I did want to make one comment on the last item.
No,
Julie,
can't do that.
That's not appropriate.
Okay. I'll give it to Dave and he can pass it on at some point. So this is item 5, consider approval for retaining consultant services to prepare a proposal to the Department of Water Resources for Proposition 1 Integrated Regional Water Management Implementation Grant Funds, which is obviously a mouthful. And right here, okay. So essentially, Monterey Peninsula region is eligible for $4.33 million in Proposition 1 grant funds under an agreement among the Central Coast Funding Area agencies. So there's 6 planning regions in the Central Coast Funding Area, going from Santa Cruz County down to Santa Barbara County. And there was an agreement that was executed, or signed, I should say, in 2017 to split up the Proposition 1 funds, and the $4.33 million would come to the Monterey Peninsula region over at least 3 funding rounds. So the first round, the Department of Water Resources, DWR, awarded $466,000 locally for disadvantaged community planning, and that is ongoing currently. And the proposal for 2019 is to award $1.9 million for both disadvantaged community projects and for general implementation. And then the balance of the funds would be awarded, currently DWR is saying in 2020, that remains to be seen if they will actually be awarded in 2020. And in order to be eligible to receive the funds, a comprehensive proposal must be submitted from a planning region and approved by DWR for each round of funding. And currently we're expecting that the proposal from this region would be due in the fall of 2019. The final proposal solicitation package has not been issued, but the draft package had a June or July workshop into making, and a proposal due within 12 weeks after completion of the workshop with the Department of Water Resources. And that's a workshop where the planning region would present its projects to the Department of Water Resources in a setting for the other agencies in the planning region to hear as well. Recently, the district facilitated a solicitation of projects. We actually received 5 implementation projects. One of them from CalAm for the Monterey Peninsula Water Supply Project was not allowed. This grant funding will not approve grants for any projects that are required mitigation. And so the Monterey Peninsula Water Supply Project, Aquifer Storage and Recovery, and Monterey One Water projects wouldn't qualify for grant funds under the IRWM program. They can obviously qualify for funds under different parts of Prop 1. And so those 4 projects were a low-impact development in Del Monte Manor Park by City of Seaside, Ramona Avenue stormwater runoff from City of Monterey in the Oak Knolls area. West End stormwater management improvements, that's low impact development essentially. And that was from the City of Sand City. And then the Co Avenue recycled water distribution pipeline from Marina Coast Water District. And I've listed the cost of those projects first. And on the next slide, I think we've got the Regional Water Management Group did get together. The Regional Water Management Group is the governing body for implementing the IRWM plan and for deciding which projects would be recommended for inclusion in a proposal to the Department of Water Resources. And so the Del Monte Manor Park was approved for full 100% funding. That's a disadvantaged community project. So City of Seaside would not have to contribute any funds for that. DAC projects do not have to have funding. Projects that are not from DACs are required to contribute 50% of the funding for the project. The City of Monterey project is also a DAC project. The group said to fully fund that, $338,000. The Co Avenue recycled water project, and I'm just skipping down to give you why we came up with the Sand City number. The Co Avenue recycled water distribution pipeline was recommended at 50% of the project cost, so Marina Coast has to come up with the other 50%. And then the balance of the funds that would be available in this round were then recommended to go to the West End project in Sand City, which is also in a disadvantaged community area. So in order to get a proposal together, we have to have a pretty comprehensive structured proposal ready for the Department of Water Resources. We've asked DUDEC to give us a proposal for putting that together, and DUDEC is experienced with IRWM, has been working with IRWM regions, I think, since the program started in 2005. They've been successful at obtaining grants in a competitive process. They've helped out several of the Central Coast regions. They're pretty highly qualified to help with this. And what they would do is meet with each project proponent, interview them, evaluate their project, and help them with the templates that would be needed to be included in a proposal, with how to fill them out and get the right information in, and in a way that DWR can easily understand the proposal. They would provide the project analysis that may be needed as far as climate change, air quality, certain actions under CEQA. They would be representing the area at the DWR workshop. And then if there was follow-up with the Department of Water Resources on the proposal, they would be providing that follow-up. And so district staff is recommending that the general manager be authorized to enter into an agreement with DUDEC, provide those services with a not-to-exceed cost of $95,600 and a contingency of $4,400 at the mid-year budget adjustment. We had estimated $100,000 for this exercise, so $4,400 would be for unforeseen expenses. And then the second recommendation, because the Marina Coast Water District doesn't provide benefits to the water resources of the water district, but more to the City of Seaside, we would request that Marina Coast reimburse the district for the administrative cost of preparing that proposal, and preliminary indication from Marina Coast staff is that they're fine with reimbursing the district for those expenses. I mean, if we take the estimate and divide by 4, then we can come up with a share that Marina Coast Water District would reimburse, and I think it was $23,500 in your packet. And with that, that finishes my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Directors, any questions of staff?
I have one question. What's a low-impact development?
Things like bioswales, capturing stormwater on site, reducing the amount of water that goes off-site.
Is it like minimum disruption of community, facilities? Is that?
Well, it's something like putting down porous pavers instead of having water run off in the gutter into the storm drains, have it captured on site. Take out hardscape and put in bioswales.
Okay.
It's that kind of change.
Larry, thanks for spending your evening with us. Were there
It's my
any
pleasure.
were there any other firms given the opportunity to submit a proposal for this grant writing exercise?
No, we went out and asked for sole source.
Is grant writing considered a special service that other firms aren't qualified to do?
For the Department of Water Resources, so we'll take a step back here. The state legislature requires that DWR have a competitive process to award grant funds. The district has not been successful in 14 years in receiving funds in a competitive process because of the competition among the Central Coast regions. That's why we pushed for an agreement among the Central Coast regions to share funds instead of go after them competitively. However, in speaking with the Department of Water Resources about this proposal to share funds, they made it very clear that they would not, I don't know if the word tolerate came through, but it sounded to me like they would not tolerate substandard grant proposals. They would turn them down, essentially. We have had another firm prepare a grant proposal. They had done work for other agencies. We were not successful in getting a grant. We weren't competitive enough. And DUDEC is a highly qualified, very successful grant writing firm. We did want to bring in a different person who has been one of the most successful in California. She's so busy she couldn't do the work. So we settled on our second choice, who happens to be a very successful grant writer. Yes, I think it does take a specialized skill to write grants to the Department of Water Resources.
So if I could continue. So it sounds like you did reach out to another firm, but they declined to submit a proposal. Is that what I'm hearing?
She said that she would like to, but that she had a lot on her plate, and she wasn't sure she was going to be able to get the help from Santa Clara Valley Water District she was expecting. And so she was not, she wasn't ready to take this on.
So given the fact that no other firm was contacted or given the opportunity to submit a proposal, was DUDEC required to provide a certification of no conflict of interest with the proposal?
No. I sent them a copy of our agreement, and I can't recall, Mr. Laredo, at one point we had a conflict of interest statement in our contract language. I think we took it out because it's required that you can't have a conflict of interest and enter into an agreement. Does that sound familiar?
I did not recommend that you take it out. I don't know if you had it in or not.
It was put in about 2000 or 2001 at the request of Molly Erickson.
Yeah, I think we still have it in our standard form of contract.
Okay.
We put it in our RFQs. We have taken out some litigation history or real historical stuff.
So I have sent our draft agreement to DUDEC, and they've said they have no problem with it as it stands.
Yeah, but this situation was another classic case of where we had a handful of capable, knowledgeable, specialized professional service consultants that know the Central Coast and know that the way the IRWM grant process goes. And we've used the person who was too busy, we used on our last federal grant application. Of the 4, we trial ran 1 and we were not successful, so we kind of had 3 that we wanted to continue to work with. I think the preeminent one is the woman we're talking about here, not available on this one, but we've used her with Monterey One Water for that $4.1 million grant that we were successful with. But it comes down to trying to find people who have the ability to just get up the learning curve quickly because they've done a bunch here locally. No doubt there's probably 15 to 20 grant writers across the state who've looked at IRWM, but not that have Central Coast experience. So that was one of the reasons for just going out and getting.
We've done our own grant writing where we felt comfortable in doing that, and where it's clear that the hurdle is not so high that we can't clear it. But in this case, it's a pretty high hurdle.
So without having any competing proposals and costs, what quantitative metric was used then to determine that the proposal for this work from this firm is the most qualified and at the best cost or most reasonable cost to the district?
Well, I proposed to DUDEC that I thought maybe $10,000 per project was reasonable, and they said we're estimating $20,000 per project on all our proposals.
So the answer is
That
there
they
wasn't
were-
a
they
metric
were-
to compare to know whether it's reasonable, the 95,000 or not.
And they said that the other firms that they were aware of were estimating around $20,000 per project.
Thanks, Irene.
Any other directors have questions for staff? Okay, and I'd like to open it up for public comment, if there's any on this item. Okay, seeing none, I will close public comment and bring it back to the board for discussion.
I'd like to move approval.
Okay, we have a motion to approve by Director Byrne and a second from Director Potter. Any further discussion? Yes.
Yeah, I'm just concerned that in the absence of any comparative proposal and cost, how do we know that the price that we're looking to approve is reasonable or not? And the other thing is the conflict of interest aspect. If we go out and only go to one firm and don't give anybody else an opportunity to participate in the process, and if we also don't do any conflict of interest certification or verification, I have really a hard time coming to the conclusion that this is the best proposal at the best cost with no conflict that the board could deal with.
Any other directors? Okay. All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed?
No.
Okay, motion carries 6-1. Moving on to item number 6, consider approval of Amendment 3 to the cost-sharing agreement with the Monterey One Water, for the Pure Water Monterey expansion.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to say thank you to you for having the motivation, stepping forward. I came in the vice chair and chair meeting in February, and you said we need to put something on the agenda, and you went next door and talked to those people, Paul Suto next door, and you got this on the agenda. I want to say thank you publicly for you for doing that. And I also want to thank the general manager for moving this forward, because I went over to Monterey One Water Board meeting, and he had to speak for the district, and he done an outstanding job. I also like to thank their board chair, Ron Steffen. I also like to especially thank Monterey City Council member Tyler Williams. He just got elected, and he took a big step in putting this on their agenda. And I want to thank Paul Sudo for help carrying this through. For 3 months, we got something done. I heard somebody out there today say we need water. That's 2,250 acre feet of water that we could use and put in the Seaside Basin. But I wanted to thank you. I didn't get a chance to thank you at the last meeting, but you did an outstanding job. All of you did an outstanding job. I want to thank the boards for what they did for voting on this unanimously. Our district and Monterey Water won. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Madam Chair, if that was the reason it was pulled, then perhaps we don't need to discuss it. I can tell you that I tried to include a red line version that was kind of a hot mess trying to compare this to that. So let me just quickly identify the changes. For those of you who've been here longer, you've seen amendment. You saw the original, you saw Amendment 1, Amendment 2, so very similar. In the first section, 1D, all we did was extend the period through December 31st, 2020. And that's because Amendment 2 was the one that began to recognize there would be costs that were not reimbursable from state revolving fund proceeds on additional design, development, and other things. We added items 6 and 7, expansion environmental scoping and review, expansion permitting. Under 1E, we added the entire second sentence because that was part of the commitment that if the project doesn't move forward, we would reimburse over a 5-year period so that it remains in the water supply side, not the wastewater reserve side. Under Section 2F, Section 14 term extended to 2020, and that just reflects everyone's agreement, both Monterey One Water and our board, that this would be work for a year. We've given just a little more time than a year, but it should close at a date certain, not indefinitely, so that's why the 2020 is there.
Any other directors with questions? Director Hoffman?
Dave, under 1E, what triggers the requirement for the district to reimburse Monterey One Water for the costs over the 5-year period? It seems to be awfully vague, and there's no trigger point that I can read into this.
Correct. It's costs related to the expansion of the facility. So when, in the previous board meeting, we approved 75% of $1 million for primarily completion of CEQA and some additional progress on permitting and design, it's solely for the purpose of Pure Water Monterey expansion. So from here going forward, you would book any of these expenses as related to expansion. And then when we hit the point in time where if expansion doesn't move forward, then that would open the 5-year window. So it's not specific because we don't really know the inflection point at which there will be a decision made on whether to move forward. Kind of depends on whether there's legal action that enjoins construction of the desal plant and then public support for an expansion. And so that date could happen at any point in the future, but the accumulation of expenditures would only be those related to this expansion effort.
Contracts are only good when things are going well, and it's when things don't go well that people go to the language of contracts. I don't see how the language here in 1E could potentially ever be triggered to the because either it should be an event or something happening to start the clock or to trigger when that 5-year reimbursement would occur. And so I'm just really concerned that the ambiguous language is really just sets us up for trouble in the long run.
Well, I agree, and I think we could add much more specific yet still ambiguous language, which would have to be under the mutual agreement of Monterey One Water and Monterey Peninsula Water Management District, that it's not going to move forward, because it's going to be a date uncertain. The cost will be certain, but it would have to be, the fatigue is set in, and we look at each other and they say, hey, we want to get reimbursed, and we say we agree, and we mutually agree, and that starts the clock. But I don't think you can have a specific act in an unknown. And there's only two paths right now that we think would result in Pure Water Monterey expansion, and those are so date unspecific that we would just have to hit a point where we go.
If I may?
Yeah.
Certainly this is not overly precise language, but when you think about the mechanics of the reimbursement, that it would start with a request from Monterey One Water saying, this is not going forward, we want you to honor your reimbursement obligation. And then if the district were to defend, the district would be obligated to say that no, the expansion is being undertaken. And if we cannot show that the expansion is being undertaken, there would be the request to reimburse. And I believe that that is sufficiently certain that then there would be the reimbursement obligation.
So they'd say reimbursement starts now, and we'd say, no, we don't think the process is ending. So again, if from a contractual perspective, they could argue that, yeah, let's start the clock and start reimbursing me, and we could say, oh, no, things are still on the table.
But we would have to back that up by saying, is that a reasonable belief that expansion is continuing? And then the question would be, what do we base that upon, particularly when our partner in the expansion is saying, no, it's not going to happen?
So that just leads it to a legal question and legal argument, as opposed to something that person could point to in a contract and be assured that, from both parties' standpoint, of what the outcome is going to start, and then moving forward. The other question I had, though, Dave, was under this reading, if the project doesn't move forward, the district assumes 100% of the responsibility for the costs of doing these tasks. And so we're estimating at this point that's $1 million, approximately.
Right, for completion of the environmental work and some other progress, yeah.
So, under the contract, is Monterey One Water required to sell all the water produced by the expansion to the district, or can they sell the water to the highest bidder?
Right. Yeah, it would have to be an amendment to the water purchase agreement. We could certainly negotiate a change, which would come with the baggage of changing the reimbursement agreement, I would imagine. But as of right now, yeah.
So they are not required to sell us the water. If they were to do the expansion, and let's say Marina Coast decided, hey, we were going to buy that water at $2,000, or Castroville, we would have paid the $1 million or $750,000, and Monterey One Water could say, well, you know what, somebody's going to pay us more, and we have no recourse in that respect. Is that right?
Well, you couldn't get to that point, but you're right, the specificity to prevent that is not in here, but you couldn't get to the point to sell any water because there's probably another $2 million of expenditure to get to final design and bid packets and permitting. So there would certainly come another request to participate in cost sharing at that point, and we could tighten that noose. But yeah, as of right now, you are correct.
Thanks.
Any other directors have questions of staff? Okay, I'd like to open this item up for public comment. And seeing none, I'll close public comment and bring it back to the board for discussion.
Move approval. Second.
So we have a motion to approve and a second by Directors Byrne and Edwards. All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed?
No.
Okay, motion carries 6-1. Okay, moving on to number seven. Consider authorization of tax payment to the IRS.
Good evening, directors. Do you just want me to explain it, or does any board member have?
Quick explanation why we spent that $18,000.
All right. So in September of 2018, we received a correspondence from Internal Revenue Service, our good friends, and they said they were going to audit the district's 2016 activities, and the audit entailed basically looking at the entire process for the district's accounts payable process, payroll, how we issue the W-2 and W-3s, how we issue 1099s, the employee contracts that we have on file, the benefit plans, retirement plans. They even looked at the employee reimbursement, so it was like the whole, the entire process for the district for 2016. So the audit went through fairly well, with the one exception, and the exception was for the 1099s that we issue for rebate customers. Now, some customers don't give us the W-9 form, and the W-9 form is basically a form that's requesting the taxpayer identification number and information from the customers. So the IRS process is as such, which says if customers don't respond to W-9, then what you do is you withhold backup withholding tax from future payments. Well, in the case of rebate, there are no future payments. This is a one-time payment. And so we should have looked at it carefully at the staff level and said, okay, you know what, if this is rebate, if they are not giving us the W-9, let's do the backup withholding tax. But we didn't have like a clear indication as should we do that with the first payment, or should we just follow what IRS instruction says. And so that's what the process was. We did release all the rebate checks to the customers, and there were some customers that did not issue us the W-9. And so basically what we did was we still reported to IRS, and we did was the TIN number, the tax identification number, we put them as blanks. And so that was basically when IRS came back to audit us, they looked at all the information and said, okay, you know what, you have got missing TIN numbers, which means you should have had backup withholding tax. And we said, well, we didn't do the backup withholding tax because there were no future payments. So they still looked at it and says, okay, you know, district has to be made liable for those backup withholding tax. There was a process, though, during the audit is we could issue the Form 4669, which is basically after the fact, and it asks the customers how they treated that rebate that they received from the district. And so there were some customers that basically did comply with that. They sent us those Form 4669. We did get credited for those, but then at the end of the day, we are still liable for $16,691 in taxes. And all of this tax, I'd like to mention that these were all related to rebate payments.
Okay, did we fix the problem?
We have fixed the problem. Since then, what we are doing now is we're giving customers 60 days to give us a W-9. If they don't give us a W-9, what we do is we do backup withholding tax and issue them a rebate check minus the backup withholding tax.
Okay.
And just so you know, rebates in the electric utility side of things are not subject to taxes as income. Rebates related to water are, and the federal government's never fixed that.
And it has been a hot debated item where other water districts and agencies have looked at it. I believe Aqua has even tried to do this. There was a motion that did make it to the assembly, but then it failed at that point, so it still stands as it is. I just had my last conversation with the IRS rep last week, and they said, yeah, there has been no movement in this, so it's still the same.
And so this actually triggered the audit. All the other stuff related to employees and so forth was just part of their audit process, but it was the blank taxpayer ID numbers that flagged it, had them come to us, and that was the only problem, because the fundamental question in your minds is, why are we even dealing with the federal government? You would think the only crossover would be withholding for employees. That's not it at all. It was this program. This is the conclusion. We're basically charged with back withholding. As Suresh said, it was a one-time event, so you can't do that. And
this
we're making good on it.
This payment and the audit will close out the 2017 and 2018 as well, because there were some missing TINs in 2017 and there were some missing TINs in 2018 because we changed our process in September of 2018. So for the first 9 months, they were the same process where we were waiting for the W-9 from customers. So this will basically close all that gap, and moving forward, since September 2018, there has been no rebate checks issued without a W-9.
And does this only apply to rebates over $600?
Correct. Not just rebates, but it's any payments
Any
made by the
payments,
district over
right.
$600.
Yeah, when I saw this, I thought, did we appeal the audit on this issue?
We did, and it was like a 6-month process, and we laid out everything to them, and it's like, we even pitched out where basically we said these are rebates, these are reimbursements to the customer. And the IRS take on this is basically they are getting something out of it. It's not basically a reimbursement because you reimbursing them for the money, which means they've got the equipment that they bought. So they are basically, it's sort of like treated like a gift.
Remarkable. So I know that I recently submitted a rebate thing for things, and I don't recall what the total dollar amount was for, but I know that I did not get a request for a W-9. But you're saying that we've now instituted a process of when people fill out the form, it's a requirement that they fill out a W-9 in order to process that request?
So the rebate form specifically says that if your rebate is going to be over $600, then you need to submit a W-9. And if that form doesn't come to us, when it gets to accounting for payment processing, we look at it. If it's over $600, we look for a W-9 form. If it's not there, we write a letter to the customer.
Thank you.
Any other questions from directors? Okay, I'll open it up for public comment on this item. Seeing none, close public comment, bring it back to the board for discussion. I actually do have one question that I should have asked, and I apologize, Suresh. Can we continue to seek W-9s from people to remedy to this, or is it now officially a wash since the requests have been ignored?
No, it's not the W-9, it's actually the Form 4669.
Or the
and we will continue to get the Form 4669. And I believe since the determination of all this fee and everything, we did receive one more 4669. So what we have to do is basically we have to send that to the tech center, the service center, and they will give us credit for those.
Okay.
So we will continue to get those 4669.
As they continue to come in, we can still
Correct.
reap the benefits. Okay, great.
Second.
Thank you. Motion to approve Director Potter and a second from Director Byrne. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Move on to number 11, receive and file district-wide annual water production summary report for water year 2018. I am the one that pulled that item. I had just one question, if it's all right to ask before whoever it is explains.
Well, we didn't bring someone because we thought it was going to get through consent.
Okay. So then I will just ask the question, if I may. In the staff note on the background discussing the number of wells, it is said that information on the remaining 11 information on the remaining 11 registered wells is not available because reporting forms were not returned by the owners.
Mm-hmm.
What action can we take to get those reports? I'm assuming that this is a mandatory report.
Yeah, we do.
Not a voluntary
Yeah, we do
report.
follow up, but sometimes they're not ready in time for the annual report, so we will continue to follow. Often we go out and just read them ourselves. John, was there much more than that? And in my first ride-alongs, I managed to find the key to the gate of a residence that needed a report because I had instincts of how you would hide a key up in a gate. It was a lot of fun.
To that.
Yeah, members of the board. Yeah, the process is every year we send a letter out, and if in the time that letter's gotten to an owner, the house is sold, we won't get the letter back. So then we got to go out and meet the new owner, make a new friend, and then read and show them how to read their meter, and then sometimes they'll want us to do it, sometimes they'll self-report.
Okay. All right, cool. Thank you. Any other questions from directors?
Just one, Jonathan, do we spot check? You know, you tell me to give you my meter reader and I'm giving you 10% less and I'm cheating you.
Right. There is a process that we get all of the forms back. We go through and we find what forms are missing, and we go around We wait 3 more months after they come to see if people are going to send them back. And then if we have their contact information, we'll call them. Lots of times they're people that don't live here full time, so they'll give us their gate codes. We'll go read their meters for them. We do adjust that back so that would be just a full water year elapsed. But we do, once we key them in, we flag if any use has changed for more than 5%. And we go do a site inspection, because maybe a house was built, something like that. But so we do follow up, and then if owner has changed, they're dropping to, usually it's off by an magnitude of 10, because they're dropping a 0 somewhere or something. So we catch those.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions? So we'll open it up for public comment. Seeing none, bring it back to the board. I'll make the motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, second from Director Edwards. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. I'd like to move now. Thank you very much for your patience. Move now to number 15, presentation by Stephanie Locke, Water Demand Manager on the Retrofits HART Program achievements.
And before she gets started, I just want to commend our 5 or so young people for having a lesson in civics and making yourselves available. Sorry about the time, but appreciate your attendance.
Yeah, we have actually a very interesting presentation this evening. I'm just going to introduce what you'll be hearing about. The district has had a partnership with Ecology Action, which is a nonprofit stationed up in the Santa Cruz area. And they, in the past, have received several different grants that we've kind of partnered with them on to help do retrofits in areas that have under-resourced communities. So in 2017, the district partnered with Ecology Action on a water energy grant that was called the Water Link program, and it was actually not just our area, but it was up in the Santa Clara area and elsewhere. But it was a large program where the Water Link team would go out and visit different businesses and residences and offer services to them to reduce their energy and water use. In 2018, the district expanded the partnership by implementing its highly efficient applied retrofit targets, or HART, program in the disadvantaged communities in Seaside. And the HART program is funded by a Prop 1 disadvantaged community grant that the district received last year. The WaterLink teams hit the streets in Seaside starting last summer, and tonight you're going to receive a presentation from the WaterLink team about what they have done. And I'd like to introduce the team tonight, and I do greatly appreciate your hanging around and listening and learning about water. The team is Gerardo Lopez, Lydia Villagomez, Andrea Luna, Salvador Murillo, and Juan Murillo. And they will be giving you a presentation this evening, and at the conclusion, if you have questions, you can ask them questions, or you may ask me questions. There will be a final report when we're done with the project. It's not completely wrapped up at this time, so you may get another update at another time, but I did want these guys, since they're done with their part of the program, to come and give you the presentation. So.
Thank you all for coming tonight. I do appreciate it, and thanks for sticking around for this whole thing. Look forward to your presentation.
Thank you. Well, thank you for having us and giving us a time and space for the presentation. So like Stephanie was stating, it was WaterLink's part of 3 programs. In 2016 March, it started in Santa Clara County, and then with the first grant that was granted to WaterLink. In 2017, we got 2 more grants from the Department of Water Resources, enabling us to expand the program to the Bay Area, San Jose, and Monterey Bay Area. This is the Monterey Bay team area. As you can see, it's a larger group. Not everyone came because, like Stephanie stated, the program ended for a lot of them in March 31st. So some of the teams couldn't make it today.
So in our work, it's really important to build trust with the community, because there's been a lot of scams going around, whether here and in all communities. And particularly, we went to a home where a lady had gotten scammed before by a gas company, and we talked with her and explained the programs, and she was really still skeptical, and we eventually got in, and at the end, after we helped her, we installed everything, and she's seen how the program works. She cried, and she expressed how happy she was that she was able to get help, and that there was somebody out there in the community still going face to face and helping people out. And I was really proud to be there. And it was cool because sometimes there's people that didn't speak the language, so it was very important that our program had people that spoke several languages, so that there wasn't that language barrier there, and we were able to speak with everybody.
And then by using the program, just like quick overcap, what we would do, just knock on a home and ask you to be let in, and then once you're let in, we would measure the faucet areas and then the shower heads, and then based on that, we would replace retrofits. And we use a ton of new technology for the organization, that we would have iPads, each team to 2, and then we just take down data, use a form instead of wasting paper, and then that data was then fed into the geo point, where we were able to see all their data and see all our leads up on a map, that we could analyze places where we've been, where places we have been, and places we need to go. So it's really useful that we were able to use that technology and then pioneer it for the organization as well for future programs.
And we also serve preschools and home daycare facilities. We served children in 54 in 8 weeks, 6 in Seaside. We installed dishwashers and washer machines. So we were able, out of all those 54, we were able to install 6 here. The daycares are constantly, using washer machines. They serve 15 children a day, about 15 children a day. So we were really happy and, proud to serve the community and, help each other just conserve water.
And then along with switching out the shower heads and the aerators, we also fix leaks, replace toilets, and then replace clothes washers and dishwashers. We were qualified. One of the big success factors with the leaks was that in the beginning we were finding that people generally in Seaside fix their leaks pretty quickly because of the higher water costs compared to Salinas and Watsonville. But one thing we did find is that a lot of the tubs were leaking, and people didn't really catch that because they were taking a shower as the tub was leaking. So we started adding that to our measure, and we were able to fix a lot more by doing that.
This is part of the community collaboration. So, for example, our program worked with many community businesses that were family-owned, and we wanted to make sure that the grant money was being given or used by local family-owned businesses in the community that we were servicing. So for our commercial dishwasher upgrade incentive, we partnered up with American Supply Company, which is a family-owned business in Salinas. We also contracted Baker Brothers out of Watsonville, who installed our residential dishwashers, our residential clothes washers in Seaside. We also, and for leak repairs, faucet repairs, we partnered with Alfred's Plumbing out of Salinas, and they also took care of all the toilet installations in Seaside. And for our multifamily resident washers, we teamed up with Wash, Golden Gate, and CoinMac, which were the ones that took care of the multifamily residence clothes washers, the bigger projects.
And then the areas we served at Seaside were all Spanish communities. You see on the map, most of our work was done towards the side of Fremont. And the area we found the most success in was 2 particular trailer parks. One was on LaSalle, and then the other one was on Kimball. We really connected with these individuals that were previously neglected by the programs just because they live in those parks. Nobody ever walked up, or a lot of those people had a big language barrier with participating in programs. So we're walking around and just speaking to the people in these areas. We found that they really needed the help, and we were really happy that the HEART program enabled us to do that. We also find some areas like around Oak Grove, which also was categorized as a disadvantaged community, but we walked around there a lot, and we seen that there was a lot of canvassing for voting around that time as well, so people weren't really as receptive, but we did give them an opportunity to participate in the program, but we did see that there was not as much success as we found in the other areas, as around Hillby and around Fremont. And in those areas, we whenever we canvassed, people regularly opened, and we were able to help them a lot. For the program, we had a goal of canvassing 3,000 homes. We were able to do 2,500, and an installation goal of 500. So we got really close by 89 installations in Seaside. We had to stop the program in October when we ran out of funding, but within that time that we did have, we did as much as we could, and really proud of the whole team for just helping as many people as we could and getting really close to our goal.
You know, the commercial side of the HARP program here in Seaside, we service 37 commercial kitchens in Seaside and 48 businesses throughout the Seaside area. A total of 405 in the Monterey Bay and 37 in the state Seaside, like I was stating. A lot of our facilities, commercial facilities, were located in Broadway Avenue and Fremont Avenue, which included like corporate fast foods, Burger King, Jack in the Box. A lot of family-owned businesses such as El Milagro Restaurant, Paris Bakery and Cafe, La Preciosa Market, and Latino Market and Taqueria.
And so upon the completion of the evaluation of the whole program, 298 clothes washers were installed on the whole program, and then 24 multifamilies and 43 single family in Seaside. So that would be a total of 67 multifamily and single family clothes washers that were distributed in Seaside. 33 residential dishwashers we gave out, 4 were in Seaside, 34 commercial dish machines, and 4 were given to Seaside. 56 0.8 gallons per flush toilets, and all of them were in Seaside. Upon the program evaluation, we created a survey to rank our services. WaterLink participants ranked our services 4.86. 73% of program participants noted a decrease in their water and energy bills. 52% of program participants reported that taking other actions to save water and energy after the WaterLink direct installation. 75% of the participants recommended our program to a family or friend member.
And like Stephanie was mentioning earlier, these are just numbers from that ended back in September of last year. For Monterey, we serviced a total of 6,010 properties, commercial, residential combined, with the water savings of 91.7 million gallons of water, and the CO commissions of 3,536.8, which is equivalent to enough water for 1,834 homes for 1 year. 8,647,000, almost 8 million for 7 vehicles taken out of, traffic, driving them, and then 424 homes of energy use from 1 year. So that's the impact in Monterey Bay. And then, if you guys have any questions for us, for the team.
Yeah, I just want to add.
Oh, sorry.
Just want to add like a quick comment with we did some work in Seaside at the beginning of the program when we had some money for it, but it was only about probably like 2 months or less, and then the rest of the time we spent a little bit in Marina, and then mostly focused in Salinas and Watsonville. But really grateful that our manager Sherry, she was able to connect with Stephanie to bring the program back to Seaside and then give a lot more back, and then just to emphasize the importance of having the HARP program there, where we helped. There was people that really needed the program, where we got they got a new dishwasher, a new clothes washer, and new toilets, as well as shower heads. So they really noticed a huge impact on the water savings as a whole. And just I feel like there was a real build of trust with our group going back into those communities that were previously, like mentioned before, scammed by other companies that mentioned they were environmental, they were going to help, but ended up just getting into a contract that they couldn't really pay for as well. So just thank you to Stephanie and then the whole Monterey Peninsula Water Management District for making the program possible and letting us help those people, because it made a really big impact on all of the team, just seeing how people were so happy with the retrofits that they got.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you so much. Phenomenal job. Really appreciate it. Directors, any questions?
Yeah. Yes, thank you. I'm from Seaside. have y'all made this report to Seaside City Council?
Not
Please,
yet, but
please call the city clerk. Please ask them to put you on the agenda so you can tell what everybody in Seaside what you undone for our city. So please do that.
Why don't we help with that? We'll have,
Yeah, we can-
Stephanie contact Sherry and the
Okay,
city
well-
and try to facilitate
Well,
something. That's
I
a
would
great idea.
appreciate if this need to be presented to Seaside so they see what kind of work what y'all have done. Outstanding job, and thank you for taking the time tonight, because I learned something. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Can you tell me, is HART connected with a specific school or something, or is it a nonprofit?
Yes, sorry.
Heart was actually a grant that we applied for and did not get several years ago. And so when we had this opportunity for the Disadvantaged Community Grant, we resurrected it to bring into Seaside. So it's just...
And we were in here on a Saturday in July agonizing over what kind of acronym we could come up with that sounded good and actually meant something, so.
Yeah, but the WaterLink program and the HART program together has really made a difference, and we'll see what we can do to get a presentation to Seaside. So,
Appreciate it.
yeah,
Thank you. Any other directors have any questions? Director Hoffman?
So, great job. I mean, wonderful work that you guys did. But I have a question. Are there any lessons learned that you could maybe give a couple of from your experience of maybe how you would have done things with what you know now, maybe a little bit differently if you were to do it again?
I'll speak to that a little bit because I did work both on the commercial and the residential part of it. The only change I would do, we were given the disadvantaged community maps, and that's what the data says, that these neighborhoods are disadvantaged. So you go in with the expectation that you're going to help people there and that people really need the help. We did find that the areas that are in Oak Grove weren't really. We figured is that they were bothered by people knocking on doors constantly for voting, but we also noticed that a lot of people weren't as receptive in that area compared to the areas that we really found success in. So we spent time there to give the people opportunity to get the program, and that time was spent there, but not spent. We could have spent maybe more time in the other areas, but just by giving them a chance. Maybe some restructuring with that, and then also maybe we tried our best at working with commercial facilities, but it was a little bit difficult. We had not a lot of time with the program and not a lot of money to get a lot of people there. I did a lot of the outreach work with a lot of the multifamily residencies, and then it was a lot of getting in contact with companies that had already previous contracts, so it was hard to convince them, like a new facility, to get a bunch of new clothes washers when they already had a contract with a different person. So that was somewhat one of the barriers. But I think overall it was a great success. It's just little things you learn before you even start the program that you could change in the future program as well.
I don't know if they added this, but Seaside installations were about 9% of the overall WaterLink installations. So I believe that I think they can all agree that Seaside was one of our tougher neighborhoods. Approximately like maybe 80% of people were telling us like we're already efficient, we already have high efficiency shower heads and this and whatnot. So we were that was kind of our barrier of getting into the door and actually measuring and having all this data for you guys in a later report. So lessons learned was definitely like making sure that people are up to date to the newest California standards, not just years ago they were like 1.5 gallons per minute, and now they're changing. So it's that would be a lesson.
Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great work, guys.
All right, moving on to number 14, status report on California American Water Compliance. Well, the general manager's report.
I'm sorry.
It's fine. It's fine. We're moving on to your report.
Okay, and I'll try to be brief. This is the monthly report on compliance with both the state CDO and Seaside Basin. And this is actual versus target. Recall that you approve quarterly budgets and this is compliance with those approved quarterly/monthly numbers. The important things here on Carmel River Basin, last month we were 274 acre-feet under, so we're a little higher now, which is actually interesting given that we are producing for ASR. You can see that Seaside Groundwater Basin was a little higher. We actually increased almost 100 acre-feet, I believe, 50 acre-feet over last month's report, and that's because while producing and injecting for ASR to stabilize the system, there's more production coming, I think predominantly from Ord Grove, but in the Seaside Basin. At the right-hand column, we are 67 acre-feet over last year, but we're 608 acre-feet more in ASR production. So I find that interesting, which means overall our production's significantly lower than last year off the Carmel River. On the next one, just wanted to highlight in a wet year, you will see table 13, water rights. This is kind of a retroactive allocation. So basically water taken from the river during certain times of the year can meet an interruptible water right that CalAm has, which is, I won't call it junior, but not as secure as the water right that is the eventually 3,376 acre-feet, which is primary right. So that 273 is actually a good sign, and that negative difference of being actual over target is a good sign. That means that they're allocating more to that right because there's more water in the river. And then Sand City, unfortunately, was a zero increase over last month. Some continuing issues with the desal plant. On production for customer service, which is our measure of demand, going all the way to the right-hand column, we're in pretty good shape. We're 235 below last year, which is relatively the same as where we were last month. So we're kind of tracking along a couple hundred acre-feet less than last year. And on the rationing trigger, the 9,700 acre-feet is less than our Rule 160 limit, which means there is no rationing in sight due to our rationing trigger. Going to rainfall, rainy season's almost over. We did get 3.2 inches in March. We're at 28.5 inches total for the year-to-date, 151% of average year-to-date, but we're already in excess of the annual average, as I mentioned last month. You can see March was fairly close to normal. And this is our rain gauge at the San Clemente Dam. You can see this on the district website. You can see that in April, we've only had basically a quarter of an inch, 0.23 inches, and the April average is typically little under 2 inches a month. So here we are halfway through the month with only a quarter of an inch. So it's, unless we get some torrential rains in the next 2 weeks, we'll probably underperform in April. And then going to stream flow. March was almost 32,000 acre-feet of unimpaired flow. The year-to-date is 125.6 thousand acre-feet, 125,000 acre-feet, which is 240% of long-term average. So the river is rollicking. It's still flowing pretty well. Usable storage is at 100% of long-term average. Speaking to ASR, we're still currently within both of our permits for stream flow. But following today, the permit drops to 80 CFS at Highway 1. So we'll be eyeballing it. We're actually going to backflush tomorrow, so there won't be any injection, I guess. Or do we keep them one for injection? Yeah, take one down, bring one up. But we're watching as the river continues to recede, then critical riffles become more important for fish passage. So we'll have the fisheries biologists out identifying how we're doing there and then reporting back to the ASR guys. Gotta go back. Gotta talk about this. Okay. So John, in true, I guess you used a butcher reference, he may have had his thumb on the scale a little bit the last few days, trying to get some production up. We're now at the second largest injection season ever. but still about half of the best ever, which was the 2016-17 winter. But nevertheless, this is our second best ever. So despite the fits and starts problem with SCADA, with the Carmel Valley Greens valve and the tanks and the wells and different things, we've managed to at least perform to that level, and they'll keep going a little bit longer here for a couple of weeks. So I think that speaks well to the cooperation between Cal-Am and the district and the efforts to kind of do the best we can with the new toy, the pipeline, and the conversations that staff has had back and forth in trying to maximize the system since our discussion about what's going on. And pretty good, and we'll continue to see what we get in the next, what do you think, John, 2 weeks?
Yeah, I think through the end of this month, if we don't get any substantial rains, and I would estimate maybe 1,250-ish.
Yeah. So that concludes my report.
Great. Any questions from directors? So I do have one question on the ASR. It says, so has the issue that we had earlier with the pipeline been resolved? Is it now operating at its,
Well,
are we
you know,
better than we were earlier this season?
Well, if you go back to that chart, Arlene, if you get the chance. Yeah, it's got to be sitting on the desktop there somewhere. Well, we don't need the chart. Suffice to say, we're still kind of averaging around 11 acre-feet per day, which is kind of, I'll say, old school Joe Oliver numbers. We did a couple of pump tests, if you want to call it that, or system tests where we had some pretty good, so if you look at the yellow bars, the right-hand is the daily injection rate, and so the yellow bar is that day's injection.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, we pushed the system pretty hard back in January, but on average we've been between 10 and 12. The pipeline was supposed to get us capacity to exceed that by quite a bit. As you can see, we proved it out in the end of the month in January is a good example, you know, one day in February. But, you know, as we've talked about, there's been some wells that, you know, the well capacity was not fully online for a period of time. Right at the front end of the season, it was scrambling to get the SCADA system working rather than manual at the Hilby pump station. So I don't know if you want to call it luckily or unluckily, but the rains didn't come and we didn't meet our permits until such time that it was working with SCADA. If it had happened sooner, we would have had a problem. Some pressure balancing in the Seaside system with the new pipeline and the pump station were new things that had to be learned. The valve that lets you go up to the Segunda tanks, the Crest tank, yet still let water flow down through the distribution system to the Forest Lake tanks. There's some learnings that had to happen there. So one of the strategic plan goals for the year is to kind of biopsy this year on ASR and find out what our vulnerabilities are collectively as Cal-Am and the district so that we can figure out ways to maximize it. But yeah, there were 4 or 5 different issues. I won't say they're all resolved, but we understand what they are, and I think, you know, as we kind of take a summer to look at it forensically and figure out what to do next year, maybe we'll step it up a little bit.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any other questions? All right, we'll move on to the attorney's report.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board, and the public. There was a single item on the closed session agenda for 6:30 this evening, and that was a conference with labor negotiators. It's negotiating season. Your general manager and his team are the designated representatives to deal with the general staff and management bargaining units. In the closed session, the board received a status report of the negotiations and provided general direction, but no specific reportable action was taken. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Number 17, oral reports on activities of county, city, other agencies, committees, associations. Anybody attend any fun meetings this month? Director Hoffman.
Yeah, I know that we're running late, so I'll be brief. I did attend the Special Districts Leadership Academy Conference in San Diego, which was structured for board members, and I strongly recommend that board members attend. It was very informative, and they do have a follow-up training or conference for training of board members later this year, and Arlene has the information. So that's all I have to report.
Great, thank you. All right, we'll move on to our first public hearing of the night. Number 18, consider first reading of a revised draft ordinance 181, amending district rules and regulations to modify the extent of the Carmel River riparian corridor.
Madam Chair, members of the board, this is on page, I think it's 165 in your packet. Consider first reading of a revised draft ordinance number 181, amending district rules and regulations to modify the extent of the Carmel River riparian corridor. If this feels like deja vu, you are not wrong. You did have a first reading of the draft ordinance in February, and that particular packet contained a draft ordinance that was correct but did not provide you with the strikeout language that is being proposed to be deleted. It did contain the additions to the rules and regulations that were proposed. So just to review again, Ordinance 10 defined the Carmel River riparian corridor, and it was based on a 10-year flood limit from the 1983 flood insurance study, which has, of course, been updated. That study is out of date, and it did involve 420 properties, and certain areas were exempted from the district rules at that time, areas that were considered landscaping lawns in the 1983 aerial photographs. An example, just going to run through this quickly, of the riparian corridor. You can see it in green along the river. The river's flowing from right to left. What you're looking at is around the Highway 1 area with crossroads to the north and off to the right. You can see Hacienda Carmel Retirement Community. So the Carmel River corridor just winds around, follows the river all the way upstream to Carmel Valley Village, where at the lower right is the upper limit of the riparian corridor, and you can see it's a very narrow riparian corridor as the river goes upstream. And the alluvium starts to narrow, and the 10-year flood line also, or the 10-year flood limit also narrows. The proposal is to extend the program activities of the district's riparian program 13.5 miles from Carmel Valley Village, the current upper limit, to the Ventana Wilderness boundary, which is coincident with Cal-Am's Los Padres Reservoir property. It would include 40 parcels. We would not change, we're not proposing to change any activities. It would continue to be funded through user fees, property taxes, and grants. And any projects in the along the riparian corridor, of course, would be carried out as funding allows and is approved by the district board. That would be future projects that the district would sponsor. Projects that are privately sponsored would come to the district for river work permit. And so a map of the riparian corridor shows Klondike Creek at the upper end of the village, at the very top of the photo, and the river winds through the canyons, includes San Clemente Dam site, former dam site, and San Clemente property, goes up past Kashawa Road, and the second map shows the extent going beyond Los Padres Reservoir to the boundary of the Ventana Wilderness. And so I just wanted to highlight some of the changes that this would make to rules and regulations. Of course, extend the boundary of the riparian corridor up 13.5 miles. Lawns, landscaping, and cultivated areas, as shown in June 17 aerial photos, would be exempt. unless those areas are under any current violations of the district rules. In that case, they wouldn't be exempted. The lateral extent of the riparian corridor would be tied not to the 1983 flood insurance study, but to the most recent 10-year flood delineation. Currently, that's a flood delineation based on the 2005 topography of the river. It was adopted in 2009. The flood insurance study was adopted in 2009 by Monterey County. And periodically, the county will likely update its floodplain insurance study. However, it's been since it was between 1983 to 2009, so it doesn't happen frequently. The rule that says that the district would provide assistance to acquire rights of way would be dropped. I believe that rule was originally to foster comprehensive solutions to the Carmel River problems and to have property owners mutually grant rights of way to carry out projects. At this time, the district does, if property owners have properties that they want to develop or restore jointly, we do encourage them and we do provide technical assistance, but no funding or substantial help to acquire a right-of-way. Just clarify some of the research and monitoring and certain management tasks having to do with vegetation management and debris clearance. And the current process for obtaining a river work permit includes a hearing in front of the board. That has, to my knowledge, I don't know that there's been a river work permit hearing. I know there hasn't been any in my history, and Mr. Laredo's shaking his head that there has never been a hearing. So unless you'd like to retain that, we would propose that that be taken out. A property owner, if the property owner disagrees with a staff decision, that's an appealable decision. It can be brought back to the board, but it doesn't have to be specified in a river work permit or in the rules for river work permits. And this would also add a requirement that any projects that are being proposed would have to show that they do not encourage downcutting of the river into the floodplain sediments. And with that, the first recommendation would be to adopt the first reading of the revised draft ordinance, and then to set a date for the public hearing and to approve the mitigated negative declaration under CEQA, and for a second reading of the adoption of Ordinance 181. And I just want to note your staff packet recommends May 15th as the next board meeting when it's actually May 20th. I just want to make that correction. And with that, I'll answer any questions.
Great, thank you. Directors, any questions?
Really, thanks again, Larry. So I noticed that the elimination of the public hearing aspect on the work permits, and you just stated that the public or a person applying can appeal, although in the revision that process is not delineated. Is that right?
The process for appealing a staff decision is in another one of our rules and regulations. So any decision at a staff level or by the general manager may be appealed to the board.
Yeah, and it's a rigid set of, I can get you that rule if you want to see it. But.
And certainly, when we've issued river work permits in the past, we've said, if you don't agree with this, you have a couple of options. We've said you could go to the Carmel River Advisory Committee and ask them to weigh in on this, and they have, or you can appeal to the district board. And so we've only had one property owner that's really pushed back quite a bit on a river work permit in the past.
And the other question I had is that one of the things about public notification was, and that's in the ordinance, is that the river work permits are posted here at the office, but that there's no requirement to put them on the website or other mechanisms to let the public know that these permits are out there. And I think in this day and age, having something posted just here at the office is, I would argue, inadequate public notification of when a property owner wants to do this. So I would just suggest that the language be changed to recognize the current status of how people gather their information.
So I think it would seem to be a fairly straightforward process.
Yeah, we already, so the Water
something
Demand
on the web.
Division is kind of the leader on appealable decisions, and they post them on the window to the left of the entryway, but all of those go on the website, so it'd be easy to include anything that you're doing on river work permits and
Just
to the website.
clarification, I mean, should that be in the rules that are being changed, or is that?
Well, currently, it's in the rule or in the ordinance that it's posted, so on the door. And so if we're going to memorialize an additional method that people can know where to look, I don't know, it seems consistent that you'd also indicate that within the language of the ordinance.
Perhaps we could write it as something like make it on a widely available platform.
Or you can say the website, and then in a millennium when people go, what's a website? We can change it. But I think that's non-substantive change, so we can do that with this still being the first reading.
Any other questions from directors? Seeing none, I'll open it up for public comment. Anyone wishing to speak on this item? And seeing none, we'll bring it back to the board for discussion.
Discussion on the approval.
Second.
We have a motion to approve Director Potter and a second from Director Byrne. Any further discussion? Okay, and I believe this is a roll call vote.
Director Edwards.
Approval?
Director Hoffman.
Approval?
Director Riley.
Yes.
Director Adams.
Yes.
Director Byrne.
Yes.
Director Potter.
Aye.
And Director Evans.
Yes.
Unanimous approval.
We move on to our second hearing, number 19, consider first reading of ordinance 182, amending rules, and there are a lot of them.
Yes, there are a lot of them. So I will try to keep my presentation brief. Hopefully you read the staff report and are aware of everything. These revisions did go through the Water Demand Committee last fall, and so the direction from the Water Demand Committee was used to create this ordinance. The purpose of the ordinance is that periodically we refine our rules and regulations based on areas that we see that need to be clarified or fixed in some way during our normal business process. And so this is one of those, what I call a fix-it ordinance. This ordinance refines certain procedures necessary to process, issue, and enforce requirements related to permits, water distribution system permits, water use permits, water efficiency requirements, rebates, and ex parte communications. I will go through fairly quickly the summary from each of the rules and what the different amendments are. Rule 11 is definitions. So there were, the definition of user was clarified, municipal unit and municipal unit allotments were deleted, and new definitions were proposed for the district reserve allocation, intertie, and manufactured home and mobile home. And the latter two are the same definitions, and that's related to the permits and conservation requirements. Intertie has been used in the past. It did not have a definition, so we're adding a definition for clarity. Rule 20 is amended to eliminate unnecessary language, and again, a lot of what I'm doing in this ordinance is trying to reduce what's in there to make it easier for the public to understand. Rules 21 and 22 are amended to clarify language again, and 21 is very minor. 22 simply talks to the statement that interties to the main California American water system would not be allowed until the cease and desist order is lifted. Rule 23, which is the action on an application for a water permit to connect to or modify a connection to an existing water distribution system, was clarified to indicate that condominiums and common interest developments are included under the multifamily dwelling submetering clause, and condominiums would technically fall under multifamily housing, but I just wanted to make that clear. The use of an entitlement has been added to that submetering, and there's a recommendation for the location on where submeters are installed, so that when the CDO is lifted, those people with these submeters have to replace them with a CalAm meter once they're available. And so the recommendation in the rule is that it is located close to where the CalAm meter will be installed. Rule 23.8, which is the DBO development entitlement, is clarified so that the property has to overlie the seaside groundwater basin. Right now it was not clear. Rule 24 is amended to clarify the deed restrictions for second bathroom additions, to basically delete a lot of the calculations for outdoor water use that are shown in Rule 24, because the board adopted Rule 142.1, which is the water efficient landscape requirements. And so this now points to that rule, so people are not looking at 24 and Rule 142.1.
And just a note, Jeannie, especially to you, this won't preclude us from addressing the second bathroom protocol in the streamlining and revision to existing rules and regs, and then coming back and making a change.
Yes, true. Then we've also indicated that permanent reductions in use that are caused by the installation of proven water saving technology would result in a reduced estimated annual water use capacity. And that is like things like ozone used in commercial laundries, recycled water, gray water for toilet flushing, that kind of thing would reduce the water use, obviously. Rule 25, what we've done with this is to separate, right now the water distribution system permit and water permits are all combined together. They need to be separated out so it makes sense to somebody who's trying to understand what part of that rule applies to the project. Rule 25.5, which is the water use credits and on-site water credits. The proposal is to eliminate the extension period. Right now we have 5 years and it can be extended for 5 years, but we always grant the additional 5 years, so it's a 10-year period of time. It makes no sense to have somebody have to come through our door when it really is just a technicality. We track water credits in our database, so we know when that 10-year period expires. We do a final inspection when a project is completed, and a property owner is required to make adjustments at that time. So that water credit tracking is currently in place. The language on the 4-year and the 5 years in the extension really does not make sense.
So if you can put some reference in there to the CDO, because I know we talked about language that refers to how that extension interfaces with the CDO.
Yeah, I think we may want to come back, and the tolling during the CDO.
Right, and
it doesn't show up in the rules and regs, even
right.
though it exists, and we may just want to
add
bring
that to the rules.
daylight.
We will be back with another ordinance like this, so I will keep that in mind. Thank you. So Rule 33, we've just added a description of what the district reserve allocation is. It was deleted and now it's put back. We've added in 141 minor clarifying language, very minor. Rule 142 amended to clarify that all sites that are supplied by a water distribution system regulated by the district have to comply with the water efficiency requirements, and that includes manufactured homes. And interesting, this evening I didn't know that the WaterLink presentation was going to mention how these people in the manufactured homes appreciated the attempt to retrofit those, but I want to make sure we get those people as well. Rule 161 adds in that property managers and owners of rental property need to alert their tenants to the conservation requirements and water waste requirements. And that rule is currently in 142, and it was, for whatever reason, left out of 161, which is the conservation and rationing plan. And finally, Rule 180, which is disclosure of agents and ex parte communications, was slightly revised so that it would be clarified. So the recommendation this evening is that the board receive public comment and approve the first reading of ordinance number 182.
All right, thank you. Directors, any questions?
I have one.
Okay.
On Rule 25, and you make reference to no interties until the CDO is lifted. Are there any emergency provisions around that issue, even within the CDO? It may be beyond this rule, but that it may apply to.
Yeah, right. At this time, there is an emergency intertie between the main CalAm system and the Ryan Ranch system. And so in the event of an emergency, CalAm is able to apply and use water from that intertie. They do have to notify the district. So we are aware of that, but it's also conditional in their approval for the water distribution system.
And is there a final authority? Is it CalAm? Is it the district? Is it some permit process through?
It's the district's water distribution system permit. So it is a condition of their permit.
Generally speaking, if it's an emergency, and we've seen a variety of different things, we won't be noticed in advance. It'll be after the fact, and we're okay with that. When it's a chronic use of an intertie without notification, we're not okay with that. One of the strategic goals is to better clarify the conditions in our permits and perhaps codify them in the rules so that not just CalAm, but any water distribution system permit holder knows what those conditions are and reporting requirements and so forth. So, there's also an interconnection between the Hidden Hills unit and Toro, and Toro's not even part of the CalAm main system, and water does flow from one to the other from time to time.
Any other questions from directors? Okay, thank you. We'll open it up for public comment. And then I will close public comment, bring it back to the board for discussion.
So from a procedural, maybe this is a question for Stephanie, from a procedural perspective and helping the public follow all these changes in the rules. So will this ordinance result in each of those individual rules being changed into the rules and regulations individually so that the public doesn't have to hunt and peck to find what the final version of the rule is? There's a version that's going to be readily available ultimately.
So,
does that make sense?
Yeah, no, the practice is, so we have our first reading of an ordinance. 30 days later, we have our second reading of an ordinance. It's published, we have it on our website, so it's posted as a public notice. And then 30 days after adoption, it becomes final. We revise our rules and regulations on the website so that it shows the current version. And so when you adopt an ordinance, that becomes the current version of the rules and regulations.
And so you do then go back and change each
Yes.
rule?
Yeah, you'll see a clean version.
Okay.
Yeah, so when you see the ordinance in the packet like you see it tonight, and with Larry's ordinance, you saw his as well. So we'll do it through strike-through and through bold and italicized to show what we're taking out and what we're putting in. And then once the process is completed, then we go back and amend the rules and regulations to make it look like that.
Yeah, we make it as challenging for you as we can, but I've never met a member of the public who said, what it used to say. They just want to go to the rule and find out what the rule is. Yeah.
All right, any further discussion?
Is there a motion?
Move approval.
Second.
So now we have a motion from Director Byrne and a second from Director Adams. Roll call vote.
Director Riley?
Yes.
Director Hoffman?
Yes.
Director Potter? Director Edwards?
Yes.
Director Adams?
Yes.
Director Burns?
Yes.
And Director Evans?
Yes.
Unanimous approval.
Wonderful. Move on to action item number 20, receive the 2018 Ordinance 152 Oversight Panel Annual Report.
And Madam Chair, this is the time of night where it appears I make my monthly statement that if you want to change the agenda or defer anything, we can do that. I know that when we meet next Monday at Chair Vice Chair, we'll talk a little bit more about agenda management, because I keep trying, and here we are. This is a light item. Every year, with the exception of one, in the past 5 years, the Ordinance 152 Citizens Oversight Panel has made recommendations to this board. They are non-binding on this board, merely advisory. But you've provided a signal to the panel that you are interested in their opinions, and they've provided a signal that they're very interested in providing their opinions. So you have at page 205 what represents the 2018 annual report. It's short and to the point. There are 3 issues of importance that they want to make sure you are aware of. The first being, and this is not unanimous, but general consensus of the panel, that the water supply charge, in their opinion, should not apply to Measure J costs, Rule 19.8 costs, be it the feasibility study, be it legal expenses for a bench trial, be it legal expenses for a jury trial on compensation, or ultimately even the acquisition. There is a difference of opinion on that panel, especially as some new appointments have come on. But nevertheless, the panel as it was constituted a quarter ago, that was a strong opinion that they wanted to share. As you know, we've looked into whether those monies can be, and you've received an opinion. The panel has also seen a copy of that opinion at this point. The second was the dual collection of the water supply charge and the district user fee. Recall that we're in the second year of an approved 3-year collection period as we try to figure out how much the user fee actually can generate as it fluctuates and so forth. They just want to remind you that as we head into the 3rd year, having a plan would be of value to both the community as well as to their charge. And then the third is the Rabobank loan repayment, recognizing that we raised the Rabobank loan in order to, in effect, pay off aquifer storage and recovery and replenish the reserves that we had used to pay for aquifer storage and recovery, under the assumption that the 1.2% Prop 218 approved user fee was going to replenish those reserves, but then without the collection of the user fee for so long, they weren't being replenished. So the Rabobank loan basically is secured by the water supply charge. There's a balloon payment at its 10th year, which is coming up in 2023. And we should probably have a plan in place. We've discussed this with you in the past, as well as liabilities for OPEB and pension and so forth, but these are the looming things out there. So those were the 3 issues which they found important, and the recommendation is for you to accept their report.
Thank you. Directors, any questions for staff?
I attended that 152 meeting, and you did a good, outstanding job. Could you explain to the public about that Rabobank loan and other fees that we're waiting to find out what is happening?
Yeah, so the Rabobank loan is specifically secured by the water supply charge. The user fee formerly had, of its 8.325%, 1.25% of the user fee was being used to replenish the reserves that were paid, that were used to pay for ASR several years ago, many years ago. When the user fee was no longer collected for that period of time, we had passed the water supply charge. We replenished the reserves so we could actually put some money in the ground quickly for ASR and also bring those reserves back up, because reserves had gotten pretty low. But we pledged the water supply charge against it because of the desire of the citizens panel, primarily driven by the Taxpayers Association and the Association of Realtors, was to sunset the water supply charge if possible when an alternate source was available. While the user fee is an alternate source, it also replaced some contractual obligations, so it's not a lot of free money over and above while there is some. So there's a variety of things going on, but one is there's a Rabobank loan that needs to get paid off. There's some sunsetting that people would prefer to have happen. We're paying for the mitigation program on the river and the conservation activities through the user fee, so there's not that much residual user fee to actually sunset the water supply charge. And then there's other competing needs for the water supply charge For example, the district will have to pay for treatment of the operating reserve from Pure Water Monterey, the drought reserve from Pure Water Monterey. So we'll be expending anywhere from $2 to $3.5 million in the next few years to build those reserves, and so on. So the known uses for the water supply charge are not fully known at this point. Hopefully, by the end of the third year of collecting them both, we'll be able to make some recommendations. Those recommendations may be keep the authorized level of the fee in place, but don't collect it. Set it, based on your annual budget cycle, set them at the level needed to only produce the revenues that you need. Those kind of recommendations will come in a year.
And one more, we got an outside opinion on this, right?
Right.
Yeah, it was outside legal opinion. I didn't see it in here, but it was the outside legal opinion if anybody wants. So.
And the important thing we heard during some of the listening sessions and some of the public comment on Rule 19.8 is there's a desire that at every step of the way to let the public know what the risks are and what the costs could be. And that's going to be kind of a competing interest for all the money of the district too. So, we're trying to proceed in a very orderly fashion on both these major sources of our revenue and figure out which one can sunset and which one can do this. But the unknowns surrounding Measure J, Rule 19.8 say, all of the district's resources may be at risk as you move forward in a step or not move forward. And so, I think there's still some outside variables that we haven't fully included yet in this conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions from other directors? Okay, I'll open this item up for public comment. I haven't had a public comment in a while. It's pretty exciting. All right.
Good evening again. Tom Raleigh from MPTA. It's gratifying to hear about phasing out of the double whammy of the water supply charge and the user fee, which we know the user fee is a surcharge, goes up as our water bills go up. I would think that the impact on ratepayers and citizens and the cost of living and housing costs, which if you attend very many city council meetings, you hear a din and repetition about the cost of housing and how expensive it is to live on the Monterey Peninsula. Water charges and fees are all part of that cost of living. So it's encouraging to hear that possible phase out, but it's not encouraging to hear the tap dancing by the general manager about, well, there might be some other needs for this money later on. So I would like to ask that you continue to ask for the general manager to come back with a concrete plan on how, if the 3 years is up next April, if I count right, that something be brought out early next year to show you how the phase out's actually going to occur. So I think the citizens and the ratepayers that are paying the freight really are looking forward to that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else for public comment? Okay, seeing none, we'll close public comment, bring it back to the board for discussion.
One clarification, Madam Chair. While the board approved the policy in April 2 years ago, the PUC dragged their feet on implementation, so the clock actually started in July.
Okay, thank you for that.
So I'd like to move that we receive the report.
I'll second it.
Okay, so we have a motion to receive from Director Burns and a second from Director Adams.
One question.
Yes.
I just have one comment. I used to serve on a committee, and I respect their deliberations and their points of view. Now that my role has changed, I see a little different perspective, and I think the overall financial status of the district is something that this board looks at, but it's not something that the 152 committee looks at. They don't look at the overall financial status of the district. They look primarily at the water charge and the variations of how that applies to the district. And so I feel like there's a larger picture that's involved in what happens in the future, and I just want to at least make sure people know I'm going to be very interested in the larger picture and not just isolated on a couple of issues that are revenue or expenditure plans. Okay.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, so then all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries, and we'll move on to our last action item of the evening, which is to consider approval of 1- and 3-year strategic planning goals.
Ask a question as a point of order.
Oh.
Are there a lot, what I want to ask is this. I feel like goals and objectives are really important. Strategic plans are important. I'm conscious of the time and the energy level, and I'm wondering what would happen, especially from those who are here in the audience, if we were to table this today and bring it back at the next meeting. And I don't know if I would even get support from the other members of the board.
I could support that. I do think it's a chance that if the public has any particular things they want to add, we
Yeah,
gotta
I'm worried
take
about
advantage of that.
If you've been sitting here forever, dying to talk about the goals, I'd feel kind of bad about that.
So I will ask the general manager, what does next month's agenda look like?
Well, I would propose that we move action items to the front end of the agenda, move this to the first action item. You'll have the 2 second readings of the ordinances you heard tonight. We have team agenda tomorrow, and we have chair, vice chair on Monday, so we can manage that agenda to that end.
Okay, very well.
Yeah, we'll have a draft budget, which will take some time, but I think we can maybe limit it to those 4, and the 2 second readings should be pretty quick.
All right, so
You could open, just out of respect to those that are here and stayed this long, you could open the public hearing portion of this hearing for those that might want to voice their opinions tonight if they're so inclined. And I think procedurally you could do that. Council? So we'd be continuing the item, but just have we taken any public comment for those that stayed this long?
So is that a motion to continue the item but open the public
Sure.
hearing?
I'd so move. Second suggestion, Mary.
Okay, so we have the motion and the second. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so I will open up the public hearing. If there's anyone who's been sitting in the audience dying to talk about strategic goals, this is your time. Step right up. Don't be shy.
Seeing none.
Well then, seeing none, I will close public hearing and I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
The Warriors. Late in coming, but well done.